Hi, I'm Dr. Kim Filer. I'm the Associate Vice Provost for Teaching and Learning at Virginia Tech, and I am very happy to welcome you to Preparing for the College Classroom. Our session today features Professor Alma Robinson, who's from our physics department. She teaches a lot of the freshman physics courses, as well as preparing future physics teachers. She is a graduate of Virginia Tech, and she has worked at Virginia Tech in the physics department since 2011. Professor Robinson is also an award-winning teacher. She has won the Alumni Award for Teaching Excellence, and she's also a member of our Academy for Excellence in Teaching. Today, she's going to be talking to you about so you learn a little bit of the fundamentals of physics and some theory of physics, but also the purpose of our session today is really to think about the things that you can do in a classroom to be successful. As you transition from high school to college and the college classroom, it's very, very important that you pick up some skills so that you think through your studying, your note-taking, as well as just how you interact with professors and build relationships so you can be successful. So it is my pleasure to welcome Professor Robinson.
Cool. Thanks, Kim. It's really great to be here. I can't wait to welcome you all to the Virginia Tech community as both an alumni and as a faculty member here. So, are the slides up? There we go. Cool. No. Okay. I think it's frozen on an old slide. Thanks. All right. So one thing that you learn as a student is to be flexible. So right now we're on the wrong slide, and that's okay, right? So what we need to do is learn how to, we all got kind of surprised last semester with COVID-19, and everybody had to adapt on the fly, and so that's what we're doing. We're adapting on the fly. So let me start by just asking you all, as you come to Virginia Tech, what I want you to do is think about what emotions do you have thinking about coming to campus, thinking about attending your first class, thinking about meeting new friends. So think about a couple ideas that you have in terms of what you want to experience when you come to Virginia Tech. As you do that, I want you to also look around your house and see if you can watch this video with anyone else. The reason I'm asking you to do that is because one of the easiest and most fun ways to be an active learner is to involve somebody else. So if you're sitting alone right now, go grab a family member, come have them join you for this. If you can't do that, that's okay, we understand. But what I want you to realize is, as you kind of continue on to your college profession, it's important that you learn to ask for help. Okay, so if you're struggling in class, talk to your classmates, talk to a professor. If you need to go reach out to someone at Cook Counseling, do so. If you just need to phone call home because you're homesick, all of those are ways that you can ask for help. So right now, I'm asking you to ask for help from someone in your household to come do this little mini lesson with me. So what we're going to do today is learn about how to learn, but we're going to do it from a physics context. So we're going to go through an example physics lesson. So those of you right now who are really excited, you're like, yes, I love physics. Well, it's not too late to become a physics major. You can think about changing. And if you're nervous, if you're like, oh no, not physics, don't worry. I promise this is going to be a lot of fun. All right. So I hope that you all were thinking about the words that come to mind as you're attending Virginia Tech, because now I'm going to have you participate with me. Normally, if you were in my class, I might call on you, but since we can't do that, we're going to do a little interactive Menti. So what I want you to do is go to your browser, and you can do this on your phone or on your laptop, and type in www.menti.com. That's M-E-N-T-I. You should see that on the screen. And you want to use the code 679353. All right? So as you do that, I want you to put in 1 to 3 words and then hit submit. Okay, and I'll give you a moment to do that. Please don't be lazy. All right? I'm going to see these words coming in. I'm going to share them with you. And we're going to use this a bunch through the rest of the lecture. So go ahead and do it now because you're going to do it at some point. All right, a few words are coming in. Excellent, awesome. All right, I'll give you all maybe 30 more seconds to type in your words. All right, and we'll go 3, 2, 1, stop. All right, I'll close the voting. And if I could go ahead and see what you all thought. Okay, so you can see people are excited, they're nervous, they feel like they're gonna have maybe some more responsibilities, they're maybe a little bit intimidated. So there's a range of emotions that you all are feeling, and that's perfectly normal. I remember walking into my freshman dorm at Virginia Tech and thinking, I hope I can make friends, I hope the classes aren't too hard. So when you walk into campus this fall, remember that everybody else is feeling all of these emotions too. So go ahead and make a friend. Don't worry, we're all trying to build this wonderful Hokie community. And people at Virginia Tech are super fun. Everybody's really excited that you're coming. We know that this semester might be a little bit different than other semesters, so it's really important for you to build community early on. All right, so we'll go ahead and go back to the slides. And I'll tell you, the first rule of being a successful college student is to introduce yourselves to your neighbors that are sitting next to you in your classes. All right, so even if your professor doesn't carve out time to do that, it's really important that that's one of the first things that you do. And the reason is, when you are connected to people in your class, that's going to make active learning really easy, and it's going to be a lot more fun, right? So if you have friends in class, you're going to want to go to class because you want to come and meet your friends. And that's true on Zoom, too. During class sessions on Zoom, before class, after class, and breakout sessions, students are interacting. So I know it can be nervous introducing yourself to a stranger. It's nervous in the most normal times, and of course, it's maybe even more awkward this semester. But if you're in class and you're sitting 6 feet away, you can still give a wave. Hello, how you doing? If you're in a Zoom breakout room, you can kind of talk to your peers. Your peers can act as in-class helpers. So let's say you didn't quite understand something that your professor said, or you just have a question about the content. They are there to help you. They can also be your homework and study group buddies. And finally, they can be a note taker for you if you miss class. Now, one of the most important things about learning with someone else is that when you teach each other, both parties, both the person that's teaching and the person that's learning, are getting improved learning gains. So let's kind of figure out why that is. So obviously, if you have one student helping another, then that second student is getting help from the person who understands the material. So that's clearly beneficial for the person who's learning. But what you might not realize is that a lot of research shows that it's also useful for the person who's giving help. Because as you're giving help, you're articulating what you know, which solidifies your knowledge. And as you're talking, sometimes as you're reflecting on your own knowledge, you realize, wait, I don't quite understand this particular concept. So often, teaching is the best way to learn. So I cannot implore you enough to please try to make friends on that first day of class, because that's when you're going to be able to, everybody's looking for friends. This is a great time to get into these study group partners. All right, so now it's time for some physics, and I have a question for you. Okay, I have a basketball and a tennis ball, and if I drop them right here from the same height, which one do you think is going to hit the ground first? All right, so think about it for a moment. You have a neighbor there, right? So I want you to talk to your neighbor, and go ahead and vote at menti.com using code 679353. Okay, don't forget to hit submit. We have some votes coming in, but I'd love to see a few more. All right, maybe we'll give you another 10 seconds. We'll do 4, 3, 2, 1, and stop. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and if we can see the results. All right, so it looks like a few of us think the basketball, a few people think the tennis ball, and a bunch of people think neither, they'll hit at the same time. All right, well, the good thing is, in physics, we can do an experiment. So that's what we're going to do next, is we're actually going to demo this out and see what happens. Okay, so I have the basketball and the tennis ball, and I'm going to All right, ready? Okay, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and hopefully you saw that they hit the ground at the same time. So many of you answered that. You probably have had physics before, and the reason is that objects are, assuming that the air resistance is negligible, which it is here in this classroom, dropping the balls from this height, then we find that objects accelerate at the same rate due to gravity. All right, so now what we're going to do is think about a more interesting question. But before we can do that, we have to talk about momentum. So I'm going to close the voting. Let's go ahead and see what you all think. All right, so it looks like there's people voting for every different option. Nobody's exactly sure, but it looks like the tennis ball will bounce up much higher is the majority of you think that might happen. So let's go ahead and see. All right, so again, just as a reference point, okay, if I drop the tennis ball and the basketball from this height, bounce about that high. So now what I'm going to do is put the tennis ball on top of the basketball. Okay, and you can see that it went much, much higher. So those of you who said the tennis ball would go much, much higher, you guessed right, or you knew. So what's going on there is that the basketball has so much more momentum than the tennis ball that when it delivers a little bit of that momentum to the tennis ball, because the tennis ball is such a small mass, that extra momentum has to translate into it going really, really fast. It must have a really high velocity, which makes it go high up into the air. All right, so I hope y'all are having fun now with some physics. A rotating body, that rotating body has what's called angular momentum. We learned that linear momentum was just mass times velocity. Okay? For angular momentum, okay, angular momentum is equal to something called the moment of inertia, which we'll talk about in a moment, times that object's angular velocity. Now, angular velocity just means the speed at which something's rotating. Okay, so if you have a faster angular velocity, that just means you're spinning faster. You're sweeping out more angles per time. Okay, so let's talk about this idea of moment of inertia. So moment of inertia, basically, it's kind of like, let me give you an analogy. Let's say that you have a car and a bicycle, okay, and you want to just get them moving, okay? Which one's going to take more oomph to kind of get them to go, right? The car, right, because it has more mass, it's harder to kind of get it going. Now imagine that you have a car and a bicycle coming at you and you're trying to stop them, right? So which one is harder to stop? Again, it's the car, because the car has more mass, it has more inertia, it's harder to change its state of motion. Okay? Similarly, moment of inertia is talking about how hard it is to get something to start rotating or to get something that's already rotating to slow down. So I kind of think of that big wheel, you know, in The Price is Right, where you have to like pull it really hard to get that wheel to spin. That has a lot of moment of inertia, okay? That moment of inertia is large. So again, the bigger the moment of inertia, the harder it is to start something spinning. And once it's spinning, a bigger moment of inertia means it takes a lot to slow it down. So how do you get a bigger moment of inertia? Well, you could just get a bigger object, right? So like that wheel on The Price is Right is big and massive, and that's why it has a big moment of inertia. The other way to do it is to put the mass farther away from the axis of rotation. Okay, so if I'm spinning about the axis that's going through my head to my toe, I have some moment of inertia. But if I put my arms and legs out, okay, I'm putting more mass away from this axis, so now I have a bigger moment of inertia. So thinking about that, I want you all to tell me, why do you think sprinters run with high knees? Okay, so think about that. And we actually have an audience here. Does anybody have any ideas? Why do you think sprinters run with high knees? Think about this moment of inertia. Shannon?
It's your center of gravity, so like if they're running with low knees, they're kind of more spread out than if they're on top of it.
Okay, yeah, so there's definitely, so as if you run with lower knees, your mass is more spread out. So when you put in, yeah, your mass is closer. Okay, awesome. So anybody could tie it maybe to this moment of inertia idea. What do you think happens in the moment of inertia when the mass is closer in to the axis of rotation?
You kind of like tuck in to keep everybody, like the mass as close to one point as possible.
Okay, so as you tuck your knee in, it gets closer to the axis of rotation. So let's figure out what we mean by this. All right, so if I swing my leg, the axis of rotation is my hip, right? So if my leg is straight, a lot of that mass is far from this axis of rotation. But if I tuck in, the mass is closer to the axis of rotation. So what that means is the moment of inertia is smaller, which means it's easier to change that rotation. So it's easier for me to go back and forth. So sprinters run with high knees because it reduces the moment of inertia. So just to make sure everybody's on the same page, talk to your neighbor about the answer to this couple fill in the blanks. When an object's mass is closer to its axis of rotation, its moment of inertia is larger or smaller. And when an object's mass is farther away from the axis of rotation, its moment of inertia is larger or smaller. So talk to your neighbor real quick. All right, and when the mass is closer to the axis of rotation, you get a smaller moment of inertia. When it's farther away, you get a larger moment of inertia. Okay, so again, we said in physics we have to describe things with equations. So angular momentum is the moment of inertia times the angular velocity. Now, if I were doing a problem, that would be really tedious to write out. So in physics, we give things variables. So we say that variable L stands for the moment of inertia, and that's equal to the variable I, which is L is the angular momentum, and that's equal to I, which is the moment of inertia, times this Greek letter omega, which is the angular velocity. Now you'll notice there's also these funny arrow things at the top of those letters, right? So you might look at this equation and get really intimidated, like what is going on? There's letters, there's arrows, I don't know what any of this means. So when you go to school next year, don't be intimidated by new vocabulary or symbols. The reason we give you these technical symbols and these new vocabulary words isn't to make it harder. It's actually to make things easier, okay? And that might seem counterproductive, right? Why do you have all these big complicated words and you say this is easier? Because our everyday language is very ambiguous. What we try to do in college is give you words and symbols that can let you precisely describe what's happening. So by having these variables, I can exactly, precisely say what I want to say. And by showing you these little arrows, what I'm telling you is that those variables are things called vectors, which become really important in your problem solving. So don't be intimidated by new equations, by new symbols, by new vocabulary words. When you see them and you don't quite understand what they mean, don't just try to memorize your way out of that. You need to make sense of what all these symbols mean. And if they don't make sense, go to your professor's office hours and ask, okay? Because everything builds, and if you lose your foundation because you were too busy trying to memorize everything, the rest of the semester is going to be more difficult. So take the time to understand what new vocabulary words mean and what new symbols mean. All right, so now we're going to do something fun. Okay, so we're going to do an experiment, and I have a volunteer, Shannon. And I'm going to pull this over for you, Shannon. Okay. And Shannon is going to sit on this wheel. And you can see that Shannon basically can move around. So it just spins on its axis. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give Shannon 2 weights. Okay? And go ahead and hold them out. And I'm going to give her a little push, okay? So what I'm actually going to do is give her what's called a torque, and that's going to give her some angular momentum. So now Shannon has angular momentum. And assuming that there's no friction in the axle or anything like that, the angular momentum should stay the same, okay? We say it's conserved, okay? So as long as nobody else gives her a torque, she should pretty much stay spinning, okay? She eventually stopped because she put her foot on the ground, and there is always a little bit of friction. All right, so now I'm going to ask you a question. Remember, once Shannon is in motion, okay, she has angular momentum L, and that should stay constant. What do you think will happen when she pulls her arms in, okay, and why? So let's say she's spinning, I get her spinning, and then she's spinning, I don't touch her. What will happen when she pulls her arms in? Again, because I can't get your individual responses, I have to make it a multiple choice question. So here are your choices. Do you think she'll spin faster? Do you think she'll spin slower? Or do you think neither? And again, you can vote at menti.com using the code 679353. And as a hint, remember that L is staying the same And that equals I times omega. So remember what those things meant and see if you can figure this one out. All right, so we'll give you another 10 seconds. All right, we'll do 3, 2, 1, stop. All right, so if you all want to show the answers here, let's see what they thought. All right, so it looks like most folks voted that Shannon's going to spin faster, but we're not quite sure. So again, the only way we can really know is to do an experiment. So let's see what happens. All right, so Shannon, go ahead and put your arms out. All right, so I'm going to give her a little push. All right, so I'm giving her a torque. And now go ahead and pull your arms in. All right, and you all got it right. She spun faster, so go ahead and put your arms out. And you can see she goes slower. If you put your arms back in, she goes faster. Okay, great. Can you all give Shannon a round of applause? Thank you. All right, thanks, Shannon.
Thank you.
All right, that was really fun. Okay, so what we saw there is basically the conservation of angular momentum happening in real life. So we said that angular momentum was just the product of moment of inertia I and angular velocity omega. So when Shannon brought her arms in, what happened? Studio audience, what happened?
She went faster.
She went faster, but why? What did putting her arms in do to that I? Yeah, it made the moment of inertia less. So if L has to stay the same and I gets smaller, then omega has to get bigger. Okay, so because her I gets smaller, omega gets bigger, which means she spun faster. Awesome. So what about this question? Is it easier to balance yourself on a bicycle when you're in motion or when you're at rest? Yeah, motion. If you've ever tried to balance a bike when you're at rest, it's really difficult, okay? It's really hard. And the reason has to do with angular momentum. So here's my bicycle wheel, okay? And I'm holding it by this string along an axle. And so when I drop my right hand, okay, the bicycle wheel just flops, okay? So when I let go, the bicycle wheel just flops. This is what happens when you try to balance your bike at rest. However, once you get the bike going, okay, you're spinning it, it has some angular momentum. So now, when I drop it, it stays up, okay? Which is so cool. So if you right now are going, wow, that is so cool, it's not too late to be a physics major, okay? And you'll also see that this actually is precessing. So if there were no torques at all, the bike would keep going in the same direction, and you can see that the wheel is actually turning. So that means there are other torques that are acting, and if you want to learn more about that, you should take our physics classes. Okay, because that's a little bit too hard to describe. For those of you who took physics in high school, it has to do with the right-hand rule. Okay. All right. So why did we just go through all of this? Well, I hope you all had fun, okay? It turns out that when you learn in an active way, it actually, not only is it better for your learning, but it's also way more fun and it makes you want to learn. Okay, so learning happens when you engage with the material. Okay, so you want to not just sit around, listen passively, you want to actually dig in and think about the concepts. Okay, so I could have simply just told you what was going to happen, done the demonstration, and asked you to take notes. But I didn't do that. What I did is I asked you questions. I had you make predictions. Because when you're engaged in that kind of learning, You then have to think hard about it, and when you think hard and you struggle with the material, that's when you actually learn. So you need to make sense of the material. You can't just sit back and take notes. You should constantly be kind of like asking yourself questions, okay, and making sure that you understand everything that's happening. Memorization is great for trivia, right? So those of you all who want to do well at trivia, go ahead and memorize lots of stuff. But if you want to be successful in college, you need to think through everything. You need to reason. Take that time, and if you don't understand, go visit your professor at office hours. Okay? And again, teaching your classmates is the best way to learn. So as you're working through some things, just talking with your classmates in your study groups is a really great way to learn your class concepts, and that helps you reflect on what you still haven't quite figured out. Okay, so it's a really great way both to learn and to sort of solidify what you've already learned. Okay, so how can you do this in class? Well, the first thing you have to do is go to class, all right? So I know that some students sort of think that the classes they had in high school, you know, let's say you had calculus in high school, they think, oh, I don't need to go to calculus because I had calculus in high school. Well, you need to go to calculus, okay? Because what we do here might be a little bit different than what you did in high school. And even if you're learning the material a second time, you're going to learn nuances that you didn't quite understand the first time through. So for instance, you might have kind of memorized your way through some of that calculus when you took it in high school, and maybe this time you can actually understand it more. Okay? Being engaged is more than just taking notes and listening. I know that oftentimes when I was in school, there were some classes where I just sat and I wrote down what the professor was saying, and that's all I did, and I thought that was what I was supposed to do. But what you really need to be doing is follow the arc of the content, okay? So ask questions to yourself, even if your professor isn't asking questions to you, okay? And if your professor is explaining something and something doesn't make sense, you need to stop them and ask questions. You can ask them, you know, or you should ask yourself, like, why does this make sense? Is this related to something else we've learned? Have I ever seen this phenomenon or concept outside of class? Like, I imagine many of you probably knew that Shannon was going to speed up when she pulled her arms in because you've seen that on the Olympics, right? You've seen figure skaters pull their arms in and then spin faster. So that's great. You took something that you knew outside of class and you learned to put it in an academic context. All right. This is probably the most important thing that I can tell you to do during class. First of all, there's nothing more boring than speaking to an audience for 75 minutes. We want dialogue, okay? It's way more fun to teach if the students are asking questions. But even more than that, I'm sure since you were a little kid, teachers told you, if you have a question, ask it because somebody else probably has the same question. That's definitely true. And even beyond that, I've found that as soon as one person asks a question, everybody else opens up and starts asking questions. Like, everybody's afraid to be the one that kind of takes that first step. So I want you to be the brave student. You're going to be doing your classmates a favor. I promise you, if you look around when you're in classes, as soon as one person asks one question, things just start flowing and it's a lot more fun. So be that brave student. Okay? Outside of class, what can you do to be an engaged learner? Well, like I said before, you should attend office hours and get to know your instructors. My favorite part of teaching is office hours because it's the time when I get to know students on more of a one-to-one level. I get to figure out their hobbies, figure out why they chose their major. You know, it's a chance where we get to see you all beyond just, you know, as a person sitting in our course. So I know that I get my office hours regulars, I call them my regulars, and you know, they come every week and it's a lot of fun because oftentimes that group of students kind of forms a nice collective, a nice community. Those are the students that I can write really good letters of recommendation for also, right? Because I know them well. The other students I can just say, hey, they participated in class, they did well in the material. But the students that I know because they came to office hours, I can talk about, you know, what they're excited about, what their strengths are. And it's, you know, it's not only good for our one-on-one relationship, it could even be good for me to write a letter for you if you're getting a job, doing an internship, or trying to get into graduate school. Sometimes people think that office hours are only for a certain student. Maybe the teacher's pet, or maybe the student who's struggling, office hours are good for everybody. No matter who you are, if you know the material already, you're going to be able to apply the material to more complex things once you talk to your professors at office hours. If you're not really confident on the material, going to office hours is going to help you do better, help you understand more. And I've seen vast improvements from students who maybe didn't do well on one exam, started to come to office hours, and then did well on the exams after that. I also noticed that at graduation every year, the valedictorian in physics is often somebody I recognize because they came to office hours when they were freshmen. Read the assigned readings before class. It'll make class easier to follow. You'll understand the words that the professor is using, and you won't have to jot down as many notes, right? You'll kind of know what's going on already. You can just jot down the most important things. Ask yourself questions about the reading and jot down questions or ideas that you have so that you can ask them in class or you can go to office hours. Like during the reading, don't just read. You can write in the margins. You can write notes down on your computer. Whatever way that you study is fine, but you need to actively engage, okay? Don't just think that reading means having your eyes go through the motions of reading letters. You want to make sure you review your notes after class and make sense of them. If something doesn't make sense right after class, it's certainly not going to make sense 2 weeks from then when you're studying for an exam. So take the time to go ahead and ask yourself, what is going on in these notes, and do I really understand what's happening? If not, go to office hours. Okay, so how else can you be an engaged learner out of class? Don't just study for exams. I think that oftentimes students are coming from high school and they were very successful just rereading their notes, going over problems that they already did. That's not the best way to learn. What you really want is spaced retrieval practice. And what I mean by that is spaced is don't cram. I know we all never think we're going to cram and then we end up cramming for exams. But the reason you don't want to cram for an exam is because if you cram for an exam, you're just going to remember it and it's just going to be in your short-term memory, and then you're going to have to relearn it again when it comes to the final exam. You're not really going to be able to apply it to the new thing that you're learning. What you want to do is kind of learn over time. You want to learn a little bit, and then you kind of forget it, but then you learn it again, and you kind of forget it, and then you learn it again, and then you really remember it, and it's in your long-term memory. So take the time to just study a little bit, and that could just be doing some practice problems, looking through your notes, jotting down some main concepts, but take the time to do that, not just right before an exam. The other thing you want to do is practice in a way that helps you apply the knowledge that you've learned. So in physics and chemistry and math, it's pretty easy to do that. You can just do practice problems in your textbook, right? So do new problems and see if you can solve those new problems. For other subjects, what you could do is build like a concept map and try to understand how are all these different concepts connected. Can you explain, how the hierarchy of what you're learning and how these things interplay with one another. You need to learn from your exams and your assignments. If you got into Virginia Tech, it's because you're a good student already, so you probably already go through old exams, and if you get a question wrong, you try to figure out why the correct answer is correct. That isn't enough. What you need to do is not only understand why the correct answer is correct, but why your original answer didn't work, okay? So if you're trying to learn how to not make mistakes in the future, you need to make sure you understood what went wrong in the first place. So for instance, in physics, we often solve problems using conservation of momentum and conservation of energy. Let's say I give an exam and a student uses conservation of energy when they should have used conservation of momentum. They get their test back and they say, oh, I got that wrong. I was probably supposed to use momentum. They use momentum, they get it right, and they think, oh, I understand this now. But if they didn't understand why conservation of energy didn't work in the first place, they're gonna make that mistake again. So it's important that you understand when your approach is appropriate and when a different approach needs to be used. Okay, and then the last thing, this is probably the most boring piece of advice, but one of the most important, is consult your course syllabus regularly. You'll notice that in college, every professor is so different. You have different assignment weights, you have different expectations for class, and the only way that you know what your professor wants is to look at the syllabus. So read the syllabus. It'll tell you everything you need to know, from exam dates to grading policies to attendance policies, to what to do about late work. So that, again, is a really boring piece of advice, but it's pretty important. So to summarize, okay, what I'm trying to get across is that learning happens when you are engaged with the material. So sometimes you'll have that opportunity through questions that your professor is asking in class, but you should also be asking yourselves these questions and asking yourself questions of the readings. Okay? Virginia Tech is full of amazing faculty and students, so make the most out of this experience. You're surrounded by people who have spent their lives thinking about these things, and they just open their office doors for you to ask them questions. Journalists would love to have this opportunity, and you have the opportunity to go to office hours every week. Now, this can also happen over Zoom, okay? So just because, a professor might not be doing office hours in person, that doesn't mean that their virtual office door is closed. Please interact with them. And in some ways, Zoom is kind of nice because it might be a little less scary for some of you who this is your first time ever going to college. You might be a little bit nervous to knock on a door. It won't be so hard just to click on a link to go to Zoom office hours. All right, so we're really looking forward to having you in Blacksburg, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And it looks like a few questions have already come through. I should say that if you read in the description of this YouTube live event, there's a way that you can ask questions by either clicking on the link or texting a question to the number given. All right, so one of the first questions is, from your experience teaching, what qualities do successful students in your courses possess? Oftentimes, what I've noticed is that it's really important for students to feel comfortable making mistakes. I think oftentimes, if you got into Virginia Tech, you're probably a really good student, and maybe you haven't had the opportunity of not understanding something. So when you don't understand something, you might feel a little bit uncomfortable with that. So what I want you to do is realize that you're here to learn, and we're not judging you based on what you already know, right? We're judging you on what attitude you have towards learning. So if you don't understand something, but you're actually seeking out help, that's what we want to see. I know a lot of professors complain that their students don't come to office hours. So, I think students are sometimes intimidated to show that they have questions, but questions are totally normal, and that's part of the learning process, and we want to see that you all are engaged in the learning process. So, so the best thing I can say is, recognize that you're gonna struggle, and that's part of learning, and that's good. If you're not struggling, why are you here, right? That means you already knew everything before you came, so there's no real point of having an education. So the struggle in trying to get better is a really great part of learning, and it's fun. That's the other thing, is that learning can be really fun, and it's fun for us to see you have those aha moments. What are my top 3 expectations at the beginning of the semester? For my students, my expectations are that they're here and they're eager to learn. I know that some students get to college, and especially in their first couple years, they have to take a bunch of general education courses, right? So maybe they're taking a course that they're not super stoked on because it's not their major. This is a really awesome opportunity for you to engage with stuff that you've never seen before. So I know that for me, when I went to college, I actually knew I was going to be a physics major when I walked onto campus, but I was kind of excited to take other classes, because where else besides college are you going to be able to take a philosophy class? So I walked into a philosophy class, and I was like, man, this is really cool, and I ended up picking up a second major. So the whole thing is that, don't think of general education pathways courses as requirements. Think of them as opportunities, and the fact that even though you're not a major, somebody who spent a long time thinking about that material is willing to teach it to you, and it's just part of your whole class, okay? People would, really love to have these opportunities, and you have them every day on campus. Let's see. So how would you describe your teaching style? So I try to be pretty interactive, because it's really fun. It's a great way for me to learn. It's a great way, for me to teach. It's a great way for you to learn. But not everybody's going to have an interactive teaching style. So one thing that I really try to impress upon my students is, you are responsible for your own learning. So if a teacher isn't being interactive, that doesn't mean that you have to be passive, right? You should be acting, you should be like thinking of questions and answering and asking them yourselves. If you have to, you can go back home and talk to your roommates. If your roommates don't really want to hear about your physics class or something, talk to your dog. If you don't have a dog, just talk to yourself and try to work things out. So it's important that you engage deeply with the material and don't be a passive learner. I know a lot of the students coming from high school, they think all they have to do is read the textbook and do their homework, but it's more than that. It's about how you approach those things. If you just change the way that you think about things, you're going to learn a lot more. What types of issues do students bring to you during office hours? So this is great. Office hours can be anything. So, often it starts, students are a little bit nervous. They knock on your door and they say, hey, I have a question about a homework assignment. And I say, great, come on in, let's talk about it. And so sometimes it's about like a very specific problem. Other times students come in and they say, hey, I know you were talking about this moment of inertia thing. I don't really understand what it's all about. Can you help me through it? Some of my really good students actually come in and they say, I think I understand moment of inertia, but can I explain it to you in my own words to make sure I really have it? And I say, yes, that is the perfect thing to do. So then they can explain it and I can help tweak their understanding. So those are like the academic side, right? But once you start knowing your students a little bit better, they might come to your office hours to talk to you about lots of different things. They could talk to you about another class. They could talk about their future plans. They might have questions about how to apply for internships. And they might just want to sit around and chat. I love to go hiking, and my students know that. So sometimes students just pop by and ask me about different hikes they can do in the Blacksburg area. So every professor runs office hours a different way. And once you go to office hours, you can kind of suss out what that professor's expectations are and go from there. So really, it's just a great way for us to interact with you. And I know that some students are a little bit nervous to do that. And I noticed in the spring, one way that students interacted in office hours with me, like through Zoom, even if they didn't really have a question, is sometimes they would just show me their pet. They're like, hey, here's my cat. And you could tell it was just an easy way for them to have an excuse to talk. So we want you all to reach out to us. So please feel free to do so, and don't be intimidated to like see your professor during office hours. What interested you in teaching physics? Okay, this is a great question. It almost seems like a plant because it actually has to do with what we learned. So I was a high school student, like many of you, but I didn't like school. I thought it was kind of boring. But I did school because you were supposed to do school, and I planned to go to college because you're supposed to go to college. But I didn't really think school and learning was all that interesting. And then I took physics, and it actually was pretty neat. And I remember being at swim class, in my swim practice, and my coach yelled at us like, elbows up, which means on your freestyle recovery, instead of swinging your arm around, you're supposed to have high elbows. So I'm in the middle of practice, and our coach is yelling at us, elbows up, and I thought, oh yeah, because that'll decrease my moment of inertia. And I realized at that moment, I was like, oh my goodness, I just turned into a nerd. Like, I am now interested in learning. This is so cool. And I decided that day that I wanted to study physics. And then from there, I realized that I liked helping my friends with physics because I thought physics was really fun and interesting. So after I decided to help my friends learn physics, then from there, I decided to become a physics teacher. Okay, so how do you engage a larger class? So in smaller classes, it's pretty easy because I know you all, and I can be like, Tiffany, what's the answer? Kim, what's the answer? Shannon, what's the answer? But in a large class, it might be a little bit more difficult. But lots of professors are doing things to engage you. They might have clicker questions if you're meeting in person. On Zoom, they might have polling. So there's lots of different ways. Like with this, right? I don't even get to see you all, and we're able to engage using Menti. So there's lots of different ways you can engage in a large class. Some of those are things that I can do, but some of those things are things that you can do, and that's to interact with your peers. obviously, don't be on Facebook or Instagram or anything during class. Like, you are here to learn. There's no reason to waste your time interacting on social media instead of being present in class. So do your best to be present and ask lots of questions. Even if you're in a big class, if you're asking lots of questions, it'll feel like there's a little bit more of a conversation. Here's a great question. If I fail a class, will I be able to recover? Yes. Okay? First of all, when you fail a test, that would be the good point to kind of intervene, right? You don't have to fail a class. So I would say at each step along the way, right? If you do badly on a homework assignment, find out why you did badly on a homework assignment and what you can do next time to make it better. If you fail a test, go through the test and do what I had mentioned. Make sure that not only do you understand what the correct answers are, but why your answers are incorrect. There are so many support networks on campus that you can use, okay? So obviously there's your classmates, there's professors' office hours, but we also have tutoring centers. Like in physics, we have a physics help place, chemistry has a help room, math has a help room, there's a writing center, and there's also a student success center that has free tutoring for a lot of introductory classes. So there's no reason that you have to fail a class. There's so much there, you just have to reach out and get some help. So if you fail your first test, find out what went wrong and try to change the way that you approach class. A lot of times it's just because there's a transition from how you learned in high school to what people expect in college. And once you do it once, you'll understand. If you end up failing a course, then you fail a course. You know, that doesn't mean that your whole academic career has been, upended. You can take summer classes. You can, also, there are options right before class is over. You can withdraw, so you can talk to your academic advisor about that. But what I would encourage is don't wait to the last minute. Try to intervene along the way. And even at that last second, you can withdraw, so you don't actually have to fail a class. But there are rules to how many withdrawals you can do, so definitely talk to your academic advisor before you just think, oh, I can withdraw from every class. And whoever's paying your tuition, whether it's you or your parents or some other nice person in your life, obviously they don't want you to fail classes. They want you to be successful. And we do too. We don't want you to fail classes either. What is an iClicker? So I'm not sure how iClickers will work this semester. That's a really great thing to have in larger classes. It's basically just like a remote control that lets you vote. Your professors will tell you whether or not you'll need one, and you can find them at the bookstore or online. So don't worry about that now because it's only if your professor asks you to get one. Okay, how do I find the best way to study for different classes? Well, one thing you can do is if that class has like a help room like chemistry or physics, you can talk to the students or the TAs or the professors who are working those help rooms. And you can ask them, like, how do I study? You can ask your professors, right? What's the best way to get ready for this exam? But oftentimes what it is trying to make sense of what you're learning. So that could be either through doing practice problems or trying to write out what's going on in your own words. Don't just reread stuff. Really take the time to maybe even write a script, like if you were explaining it to somebody else, if you had to explain what is photosynthesis. So you want to maybe jot down an explanation that you could explain to your grandmother. All right, so that's probably one of the best ways, but you can always talk to your professors because they're going to know what you need to be successful in their particular class. Okay. What about tips for success online? So online learning is going to be a little bit different, right? So you're not going to be able maybe to have that direct contact. I know that a lot of times you can show what you know and what you don't know by your facial expressions, right? You can give that confused look that will help the professor say, oh, Alma's confused, let me pause. So you need to maybe be more of an advocate for yourself, okay? And reach out either, if you're in Zoom, there's a great chat feature you can put in there like, hey, what does that mean? Depending on how your professors run classes, they might ask you to do a Zoom raise your hand or to unmute and ask a question. But again, learning online and learning in person, the things that are the same is that you have to be actively engaged. So if you can find a way to do that, you'll be successful. All right, I think we're coming to an end here, so I think Kim's going to come in. Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to meeting some of you, and we're happy to have you in our Hokie community.
Well, thank you to Professor Robinson. There are so many amazing professors at Virginia Tech, and as you heard, a lot of them have very different styles, but all of our professors want you to be successful. They want you to learn in their classes, and they want you to engage both in the material, but also in the thinking. This isn't a time to memorize, this is a time to learn. And so we're really excited to have you come into Blacksburg, being part of our learning community, but also hearing that our community is made up of a lot of people. From professors to other students to your advisors. It really takes processing information, but also reaching out to others. So learning is part of the whole experience. And we really are excited for you to come here and engage in that Hokie experience when we see you in August. So thank you for taking time with us. We really appreciate it. Go Hokies!